Hi YouTube, this is Avix. After I made my Accolade guide video, it came to my attention that many people don't know how Force Powers works, especially on the Infinity server, which isn't really surprising because Force Powers was not a popular template in pre-CU. Not only that, the Infinity server has also made numerous changes specifically to Force Powers, so I think it definitely needs its own guide. I've been playing Powers Jedi here for over 2 years, and I think this server did a great job in making this template feel powerful and fun to play, and in my opinion, I think Powers is the best overall Jedi build. This video is jam-packed with information, and whether you are a beginner or even a veteran player, I can almost guarantee you'll learn something new. I even learned several things while doing research for this video. The Force Powers tree has a ton of abilities, so it can definitely be overwhelming for anyone not familiar with it. To help simplify things, I'm going to cross out several abilities that you'll never need to use. In addition, I will categorize like abilities together. There, that should be much more manageable. It's also worth noting that all abilities are improved with FRS rank, but for simplicity, I will only be talking about the base values as a Padawan. Force Lightning is your primary DPS ability. Around 80 to 90% of your DPS will be from Force Lightning alone. There is a short cooldown on this ability, which prevents you from spamming it repeatedly. The cooldown scales depending on how many skill points you have invested into the Powers tree. If you only have the minimum skill points for Force Powers to get Lightning Single 1, then the cooldown will be 4 seconds long. But if you have Master Powers, the cooldown will be reduced to 2 seconds. A few interesting notes about Lightning. It deals electric damage in PvP, but it deals lightsaber damage in PvE. It can also apply Dizzy and a small health fire dot. Lastly, Lightning will be your primary source of Force Siphon, which is a new hidden passive ability where you gain Force back based on the damage you do. I will talk more about Force Siphon later in the video, but Force Siphon is not mentioned anywhere in the skill tree, and if you're new here, you would likely never know this hidden passive even exists. Force Throw is going to be your primary filler ability between lightnings. It does medium damage that is split evenly between all 3 handbars. But because the damage is split, the effective DPS is not as great as it may seem. But it does apply states, stun, dizzy, and blind. It's also the only other ability besides lightning that has Force Siphon. For single target situations, you'll want to use Force Throw 1 rather than Force Throw 2. Even though Force Throw 2 does more DPS, it's slower, which translates to a longer wait time between Force Lightnings, which ultimately means you're losing DPS by using Force Throw 2. Not only that, but Force Throw 2 costs significantly more force and should only be used in AoE situations. Side note that Force Speed does make Force Throw 2 faster, but it's still not worth using in single target situations in my opinion. Interesting side note that Force Throw deals blast damage, making it one of the few weapons in the game that can deal blast damage, which makes this ability a turret buster. Force Choke is the last main form of damage you will be using for most rotations. It has a huge 64 meter range, and it applies a dot, or damage over time, for 30 seconds. It deals damage when cast, and then the dot will tick every 5 seconds for a total of 6 times, and is considered lightsaber damage. Choke is an interesting ability because it actually targets the lowest handbar. So for example, if your target's action bar is lower than their health or mind, then the dot will hit action. This can be both good and bad. In most cases, health is usually what goes down the fastest, but if your target has a lower action or mind pool, then Choke will be doing its own thing, damaging a different pool than what you want. So for PvE, you generally want to wait until you deal enough damage to the health pool to get it lower than action and mind before you use Choke. Choke can also be great against bounty hunters. If the bounty hunter isn't properly stacking mind drinks, then Choke will immediately tick away at their mind and can be devastating to a bounty hunter who's not prepared. Mind Blast is a situational ability, and it's not something you'll normally use, but there are two main features of Mind Blast that make it useful. First, as the name implies, it deals damage to the mind pool. Second is that it is an AoE warcry. If you're unfamiliar with how warcry works, it's basically a 10-second silence that is interrupted by damage. The mind damage part of this ability is mostly useful against bounty hunters, and the warcry part is mostly useful in group PvP when you want to silence enemy healers. Note that this ability has a 3-second cooldown, so similar to lightning, it's not something you can spam. And it's worth noting that even though you can use this on someone who you are directly targeting up to 32 meters away, the 16-meter AoE is from your character's position. So make sure you are standing near any extra enemies you want to hit with the Mind Blast AoE. For those familiar with pre-CU, you already know that Intimidate is the strongest debuff in the game. You'll get 3 versions of Force Intimidate, but you'll really only use 2 of the 3, which is Intimidate Single and Intimidate 2, which is an AoE. Intimidate 1, which is a cone, is not really worth using if you have Intimidate 2. Intimidate Single is great in single target situations because it's super cheap at only 20 force cost, but the downside is that it has a shorter duration and has a 6-second cooldown on the specific target. Force Intimidate 2 is amazing in AoE situations and lasts for a staggering 90 seconds. You can even use it in single target situations, but just be mindful of your force. Against a single bounty hunter, I would recommend Intimidate Single to conserve force. Lastly, I want to mention that the AoE effect on Force Intimidate 2 is actually an AoE from your target's location and not from your character's location. This is completely opposite of how the AoE from Mind Blast works, so just thought you should know the difference. Force Knockdown, as the name implies, is a knockdown ability. Interestingly, Force Knockdown deals stun damage, but there are very few situations where stun damage will be superior to lightsaber damage, so I wouldn't worry about that. You'll get 3 versions of Force Knockdown, but you'll only need Force Knockdown 3, which is an AoE. I would only recommend using Force Knockdown for AoE situations because for single target situations, you'll instead want to use Saber Throw 2. Saber Throw 2 costs significantly less force and is overall just way more efficient for single target. And a final note, the 20-meter AoE from Force Knockdown 3 is based on your character's location. This works the same way as the Mind Blast AoE, so make sure you are standing near any extra targets you want to knock down with the AoE. Similar to Mind Blast, your primary target can still be up to 32 meters away. The next ability is Force Weaken. The primary function of Force Weaken is to lower your target's maximum ham pool. This acts as damage when Weaken lowers the target's maximum ham below their current ham. This can be really effective against high ham bosses because you can basically delete 20% of their health with one button, and when Weaken wears off after 60 seconds, their max ham will return to normal, but they will not regenerate any ham that was initially lost. So it will look like they took a huge chunk of damage when it wears off. In PvE, you only need to weaken once to deal the initial damage, ideally right at the start of the fight. Applying Weaken again won't do anything other than make it appear like the enemy healed. You'll get 3 versions of Force Weaken. Weaken 1 and 2 can stack up to 20%, but Weaken 3 already does that, so you don't need Weaken 1 and 2. Weaken is also useful in PvP to make it easier to burst down your target quickly, and specifically against other Jedi, you'll reduce their natural force regeneration by 10%, which will help in a prolonged fight. However, I would advise against using Weaken against bounty hunters, because it costs a lot of force, and generally bounty hunters are so tanky that you can't really burst them down. From my experience, using Force Weaken on a bounty hunter will generally only hurt you, as it will make you run out of force sooner. And last but not least, we have Force Breach. Force Breach is a single target debuff and is an insane ability that does a ton of different things. Feel free to read the entire list, but TLDR, you deal way more damage to your target while they are breached in both PvP and PvE. A few side notes about Breach against bounty hunters: I would save Breach until their foods start to fall off. Using Breach against a bounty hunter who has synth stake probably won't help you much. Also, know that even though your target might still be on cooldown, you'll still burn the force to attempt to breach, so be careful not to spam Breach, otherwise you'll end up wasting a ton of force. Now that we're finished going over the abilities, let's talk about Force Siphon. This is a hidden passive that isn't mentioned anywhere in the powers skill tree, so new players may not know about it. Force Siphon is basically like a lifesteal function, but for force. You gain force based on how much damage you deal. Technically, all force abilities siphon, but you'll only notice force gains on Force Lightning and Force Throw. So for the sake of simplicity, we'll just say that only these 2 abilities have impactful siphon. Now, because the amount of siphon is based on damage dealt, you want to try and maximize your damage output at all times. This includes things like clearing Intimidate, knocking down your target, and using Breach. All of these things increase your DPS and in turn will increase the amount of force you gain. There is a siphon penalty on AoE and cone abilities, so typically you need to hit at least 4 or 5 targets before you see noticeable force gains when using cone. And like the lightning cooldown and Cloak of Pain, which we'll discuss next, the amount you siphon also scales with how many skill points you have invested in the powers tree. So you'll see the most benefit by going all the way to master powers. There is a siphon penalty when attacking other players. You'll notice you gain only about half of the force you normally would. And lastly, Siphon is completely disabled against NPCs and creatures while Teft. This is so you can't just cheese a PvP fight by recharging your force on NPCs or creatures. And I forgot to mention, Siphon does not work on structures or layers. I briefly mentioned Cloak of Pain. This is another hidden passive that is exclusive to the powers tree. Cloak of Pain is a short 8-second buff you receive whenever you deal any powers damage, and the duration is refreshed whenever you deal powers damage again. The strength of the buff scales with how many skill points you have invested in the powers tree. At minimum, this is 25% protection, and goes up to 45% at master powers. This buff does stack with both force armor and force shield, but not fully. The way I like to look at it is Cloak of Pain has 2 effects, or 2 parts to it. 1 is protection against force attacks, and 2 is protection against non-force attacks. If you have force armor active, then Cloak of Pain will stack with it, but the protection against non-force attacks is cut in half. So rather than Cloak of Pain stopping 45% of the damage, it will only stop 22.5% of the damage when stacked with Force armor. The same applies to Force attacks if Force shield is active. One negative about Cloak of Pain is that your melee and ranged defense is reduced while the buff is active. This is to discourage players from making a Powers Defender build because the devs found that it was too tanky. The idea is with Cloak of Pain, you'll get hit more frequently, but each hit will deal less damage. But the real benefit comes against bosses because bosses have 100% accuracy. So your melee and ranged defenses are completely useless anyway. And this is where Cloak of Pain really shines. A tip to help maintain Cloak of Pain is that the dot damage from Force Choke refreshes the buff, which means one choke will keep Cloak of Pain running for 38 seconds. Next, let's talk about your lightsaber and how that interacts with powers. Unlike normal lightsaber abilities you might be used to, powers abilities do not care about your lightsaber's damage. Instead, it only cares about the average damage of your pearls. On Infinity, novice powers can use first generation lightsabers, which can house one pearl, which is ideal since you want the average. You can see from the numbers here that with a 50 damage pearl, you'll do 10% more damage, and with a 70 damage pearl, you'll do 15% more damage, and everything in between. For PvE, I wouldn't recommend using anything above 50 since the damage gain is pretty small, and these pearls can get quite expensive. It's recommended to only use your big pearls for PvP. A tip for you guys, I personally like to keep multiple sabers in my inventory. One preloaded with a 50 damage pearl for farming, and another with a stronger pearl for PvP. Several things scale with the number of skill points in the powers tree, including Force Lightning cooldown, Cloak of Pain strength, and Force Siphon strength. So you are already heavily incentivized to go all the way to Master Powers. But there is a pretty significant hidden bonus that comes with the Master Powers box that I couldn't find in any patch notes. Did you know that the Master Powers box makes your Force Lightning deal 2 times damage and Force Throw deal 1.5 times damage against bounty hunters and Mandalorians? Honestly, it makes sense from a balancing perspective because without this, then powers would have literally no chance against bounty hunters, so this hidden passive is definitely needed. But I figured you should know because if you try a powers template that doesn't have the master box, then you're really gimping yourself against bounty hunters. I recorded some footage, and here is the damage without the master powers box. Now here it is with the master box. The difference is pretty insane and again absolutely necessary for balancing, but I just found it interesting that it's not in the patch notes. I should stress that this bonus is only against bounty hunters and Mandalorians. The game checks to see if the target has either the Investigation 3 box in Bounty Hunter or the Deathwatch Initiate box in Mandalorian. If the target has either of these boxes, then the bonus damage is activated. Let's talk about some templates that I would recommend. There are many templates that can work, but here are my top 3. The first template is commonly known as Healer Powers. You can see on screen. This template is the best PvE template in the game, hands down, no question. You have high damage, practically unlimited force, and a 1-button heal everything that heals any dots, heals all wounds, all battle fatigue, all damage in 1 button. And if you're multi-boxing with an alt, you can also heal your alt. This template will allow you to face almost any PvE encounter. It is also quite strong in group PvP since you can heal your teammates. But the downside is this template is quite squishy and harder to play because you can get deleted almost instantly if you let Cloak of Pain drop off, especially in PvP. This template is also very weak to ranged bounty hunters because you have low saber block, Jedi state defense, and Jedi toughness. So you're going to have a really hard time against bounty hunters. The second template that I would recommend is commonly known as the Powers Soldier. And the Powers Soldier is the quintessential PvP Powers template. It has all the perks of Master Powers, and you get the benefits of Force Shield, Channel, Drain, and Jedi State Defense. This is widely considered the best PvP Powers template against other Jedi specifically. It also fares decently well against bounty hunters since you gain the benefit of Jedi State Defense and Poison Resist. However, I would say this is the weakest of the three templates as far as PvE is concerned, but by no means is it bad. This template is still very solid for PvE. Lastly, we have my template. My template doesn't have a name, so I'm just going to call it the Avix build for now. I prefer this template over the other two because it's kind of like a jack of all trades. This Avix template is better than Power Soldier in PvE because you gain the Jedi toughness bonus from the Defender tree. But I would say my template is worse than the Healer Powers template for PvE because really nothing beats a one button total heal. This template is also the best of the three templates against bounty hunters because not only do you have Jedi state defense, but you also have Jedi toughness from Defender, plus you have Force Run 2, which is insanely strong in bounty hunter fights. And lastly, this template is solid against other Jedi as you have increased tankiness from the Force defense bonuses in Defender, plus you have Force Run 2. The main downside is similar to healer powers, you are reliant on keeping up Cloak of Pain to survive in group PvP, since you don't have Force Shield 2. Next, I want to recommend some macros that you can use. First, here is my single target macro. I always like to put heal states self at the start of all of my attack strings. It's just something that has just helped me a lot. It's one less thing you have to think about. And it's just kind of a one button auto game, you know, like you don't really have to think too hard. I also like to include Intimidate single with my single target macro. It's just one less thing to think about. You don't have to include the Intimidate on there, but I like to. And it's optional. You can also put a heal, like heal all 2 in here. Or if you have Master Healer, then you can do total heal self as part of this macro, and that will work really, really well for your single target macro. For your AoE macro, again, similar to the single target, I like to put heal state self. But you'll notice one key difference is that I didn't put Intimidate in here. If you want to, you can put Force Intimidate 2 into this macro, but the reason I don't is because Force Intimidate 2 costs a lot of force, and also it lasts 90 seconds, and so with such a long 90-second intim, I found it kind of pointless to put it in the macro. I can just use it, every 60 to 90 seconds, and I'm fine. So that's why I didn't put it in there, but you can if you want to. And same with the heal, especially if you have the Master Healer, you can put heal into this macro as well, just to make it more, simple one-button gameplay. This third macro is a Mind Blast macro that I would recommend if you are specifically trying to use Mind Blast against bounty hunters. Mind Blast has a 3-second cooldown, which means you need to use at least 2 abilities in between each Mind Blast. So this is the macro that I would recommend. It works pretty well against bounty hunters, especially if you notice their mind pool is pretty low. Then this is almost a surefire way to get a win against the bounty hunter. And last of the macros I would suggest are some cooldown macros. I wish Star Wars had, I don't know if anyone plays World of Warcraft, but you have like weak auras. Weak auras basically tell you when certain debuffs are ready or when certain cooldowns are ready, and Star Wars doesn't really have that. So this is kind of my workaround for it. Basically, you do a macro and postures and knockdowns have a 30-second cooldown on it. So in my macro, I put a 30-second pause in between, and then I have it send a tell to myself, letting me know that the knockdown or the posture is ready. And Breach has a 45-second cooldown, so same thing for Breach, just do a pause 45 and have a tell go to myself, letting me know that Breach is ready. As we approach the end of this video, let me give you guys some general info and tips to help your gameplay. First, you should know that Force Power's accuracy is based on lightsaber and melee accuracy. This means the melee accuracy Force-sensitive boxes will help, along with anything that improves lightsaber accuracy, such as lightsaber accuracy tapes and accuracy vapors. On a similar note, lightsaber speed does not affect force powers, but it does affect lightsaber abilities like Saber Slash 2 and Saber Throw 2. So you'll still want to max out your lightsaber speed just for these 2 abilities. But speaking of speed, the Force Speed ability from the Enhancer tree does actually work on 2 Powers abilities, which are Force Throw 2 and Force Weaken. All other Force abilities are already speed capped except for these 2. I'm not sure why, but that's just what it is. Last bit of general info is all Jedi abilities, including both powers and lightsabers, is considered medium armor pierce, which is shown on your lightsaber. Which means in PvE, you will have heavy armor pierce while the target is breached. My overall thoughts in its current state, I think Powers is extremely strong for both PvE and PvP, and it is a template that I would highly recommend. I will admit that Master Lightsabers is generally going to do better against bounty hunters, but outside of bounty hunters, Powers just deals considerably more DPS than Master Lightsabers, and having virtually infinite force from Siphon in PvE is just so much fun and makes most PvE encounters very comfortable to play. However, something I never mentioned is that Powers Jedi actually has a bad matchup against a Lightsabers Jedi in a 1 versus 1 duel. The reason is because of a little ability called Force Absorb. Force Absorb will allow the Lightsabers Jedi to recharge their force when they get attacked, but the Powers Jedi doesn't have anything to absorb, so in a duel, the Lightsabers Jedi will win the Force Drain race. Anyway, I hope you found this video informative, and as always, if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below. I am very active on YouTube, so I'm happy to answer any and all questions. Even if it's been years since the video's posted, I should still be around and I'll still respond to your questions when I can. Thank you all so much for watching. This was by far the most complicated video I've worked on, and I'm glad that I can finally get it out to you guys. Please drop a like on the video if it was helpful, and I hope you all have a great day.